The crowd outside the old Whitmore auto garage had gathered like vultures circling a wounded animal, and Marcus Calder felt every eye boring into his back as he knelt beside the dead engine of a Bentley Continental that didn't belong to him, didn't belong to his world, and definitely didn't belong in his cracked, oil-stained driveway. The man who owned that car, Reginald Ashbourne, stood with his arms crossed and his three-piece suit gleaming under the noon sun, a smirk twisting his face like he already knew how this story would end. "Tell you what," Reginald said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, loud enough for Marcus's 6-year-old daughter Nora to hear from where she sat on the porch step clutching her stuffed rabbit, "if you can start this car right now, in front of everyone, I'll marry my secretary on the spot. That's how impossible this is for a grease monkey like you." The crowd laughed. Marcus didn't. He just looked at the engine, then at his daughter's frightened eyes, and felt the weight of 3 months of unpaid rent pressing down on his chest like a stone. Before we go further into Marcus's story, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in people rising up when the world tries to push them down, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Marcus Calder had not always been a man kneeling in dirt for spare change. 5 years earlier, he had been an engineer at one of the largest automotive firms in the state, a man with a steady paycheck, a wife who laughed easily, and a baby girl who had just learned to say, "Dada." Then the accident happened. A drunk driver on a rain-soaked highway took his wife from him in the time it takes to blink, and left Marcus holding a newborn and a grief so heavy he could barely stand upright for months. He lost his job not long after, unable to focus, unable to function, and the world that had once seemed full of promise turned into a narrow hallway of bills, eviction notices, and sleepless nights spent rocking Nora back to sleep while quietly weeping into her blanket so she wouldn't hear him break. He had taken whatever work he could find. Fixing neighbors' cars in the garage behind his rented house became his lifeline, not because he loved engines, though he did, but because it was the only thing left that made him feel like he still had value in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. Word spread slowly. People in the small town of Belhaven began bringing him their broken trucks, their stalling sedans, their engines that no mechanic shop wanted to touch because Marcus had a gift, a quiet, almost supernatural understanding of machines that no diploma could have taught him. But gifts don't pay rent fast enough, and reputation doesn't fill an empty refrigerator, and so when Reginald Ashbourne's Bentley broke down right outside Marcus's garage that morning, sputtering and dying as if it had chosen that exact spot out of cruelty, Marcus saw not an opportunity, but another complication he didn't have time for. Reginald, however, saw something else entirely. He saw a worn-down man in a stained jumpsuit, a single father everyone in town pitied, and he saw an easy target for a joke he could tell at dinner parties for years. This car, Reginald announced to his small entourage of assistants and onlookers, was custom-built in Germany. Even my own mechanics in the city couldn't diagnose what's wrong with it. There's no way a backyard nobody fixes German engineering. He said it with a laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who has never once worried about where his next meal would come from, the kind of laugh that doesn't realize how deeply it can wound someone already drowning. Marcus said nothing. He simply opened the hood, the way he had opened 1,000 hoods before, and let his hands do what his mouth could not. He listened to the silence of the engine the way another man might listen to a heartbeat, feeling for what was missing rather than what was broken. Nora watched from the porch, her small fingers white around her stuffed rabbit, because she had seen her father humiliated before by men who mistook his quiet dignity for weakness, and she hated it every single time. "You'll lose," Reginald continued, unable to resist twisting the knife further, "and when you do, maybe you'll finally understand that some of us are built for more than fixing dirty cars in dirty towns." A woman in the crowd gasped. Even Reginald's own assistant looked uncomfortable. But Marcus simply wiped his hands on a rag, looked up, and said the only words he would offer the billionaire that entire afternoon, "Deal." The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Reginald's smirk widened, certain he had already won, already imagining the laughter he'd share with his colleagues about the day he humiliated a small-town mechanic into a public spectacle. He didn't know, of course, that 3 years earlier, before his life collapsed, Marcus had spent 2 years specializing in European engine systems, that he had once been flown to Munich for a conference on the very engineering Reginald's car used. He didn't know that grief had not erased Marcus's mind, only buried it beneath exhaustion and heartbreak. Marcus reached for a tool, his hands steady despite the laughter still echoing around him, and began working with a focus so intense that even the children in the crowd fell silent. Minutes passed. Sweat gathered on Marcus's brow, not from nerves but from the late afternoon heat pressing down on Belhaven's cracked pavement. He found it eventually, a fault buried deep in the car's electronic control unit, a problem so specific that only someone who had studied that exact system would have recognized it. As he made the final adjustment, the sky above them, clear just moments before, rumbled with a sudden, distant growl of thunder, as if the heavens themselves were leaning in to witness what was about to happen. Nora stood up from the porch step, gripping her rabbit tighter, her eyes fixed on her father with a hope so pure it could have broken anyone's heart who saw it. Reginald's smile faltered for the first time, the laughter in his throat catching as the first true rumble of doubt crept into his chest. Marcus turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and powerful, exactly as it had been designed to sound the day it rolled off the assembly line in Germany. The crowd erupted, not in mockery this time, but in stunned, disbelieving applause. Reginald stood frozen, his face draining of color as the reality of his own words settled over him like the storm clouds now gathering thick and dark above Belhaven. Thunder cracked again, closer this time, sharp and sudden, as though punctuating the moment with nature's own exclamation point. Someone in the crowd shouted, "He did it! He actually did it!" and the sound of genuine astonishment rippled through the gathered townspeople like a wave breaking against a shore that had grown used to disappointment. Reginald, to his credit, did not run. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the man he had so casually humiliated, and something in his expression shifted, the arrogance peeling away to reveal a flicker of shame he likely hadn't felt in years. He had built his fortune on confidence and ruthlessness, but standing there in front of a single father who had just outperformed his own city mechanics with nothing but worn tools and quiet determination, Reginald felt smaller than he had in a very long time. He didn't marry his secretary that day, of course. The joke had never been a real promise, but something far more important happened in its place. Reginald asked Marcus, with a humility that surprised even his own assistants, how a man with such extraordinary skill had ended up fixing cars in a small-town garage. And for the first time in years, Marcus told someone the whole truth, about his wife, about Nora, about the years of grief that had quietly swallowed his ambitions whole. By the time the rain finally broke loose from the dark clouds above, soaking the crowd and sending most of them scattering for cover, Reginald remained standing in the downpour beside Marcus, his expensive suit ruined, his pride humbled, and something new taking root in its place. Within weeks, Reginald had offered Marcus a position overseeing technical operations for his company's new automotive division, a job that came with more than just money. It came with dignity, with stability, with a future Marcus had stopped allowing himself to imagine. Nora got new shoes that didn't have holes in them. She got a warm bed in a real house. And most importantly, she got to watch her father stand tall again, not because a billionaire had given him charity, but because the world had finally seen what she had always known, that her father was extraordinary. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that kindness and quiet strength can outlast mockery and pride, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below, because your words genuinely mean the world to storytellers like us trying to share something real. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask something special from you. If you have ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated the way Marcus was that day, type the words, "I rise," in the comments below. Let's fill this space with strength, because somewhere out there, someone scrolling through tonight needs to see those words and remember they are not alone. Marcus Calder never forgot that storm, the one that rolled in just as the engine roared back to life, as if the sky itself had been waiting to witness a man's quiet dignity finally rewarded. He often told Nora, years later, that thunder isn't always a warning of something breaking apart, sometimes it's the sound of something, at long last, falling perfectly into place. And in the small town of Belhaven, Where pity once followed his name like a shadow, people began telling a different story instead, one about a father who never stopped believing in his own worth, even when the whole world had momentarily forgotten it.